Hello and welcome to the SME Focus show powered by MTDCNC. I'm Mark Weymouth from the Sensor Specialist Plus Automation. On the show, as always, we aim to highlight aspects of UK manufacturing or topics of interest to SMEs. Therefore, my guest today is Vince Pizzoni, Associate Professor at the University of Nottingham. According to his LinkedIn as well, he's got more than 20 other roles, which I'll group together and describe him as a master of mentoring or a serial sponsor. As Vince talks about mentoring over 2,000 youngsters. Hi, Vince. Welcome to SME Focus.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'll kick off by talking about your relationship with Nottingham University, as that's where you actually studied and got a first-class honours degree in chemical engineering. And if I can take you back to those times, can I ask what your aspirations were when you left university and joined Courtaulds? What about engineering appealed?
Maybe I can go back even further, actually, Mark, because why on earth did I choose chemical engineering in the 70s? In fact, it was a strange thing how I got to do it, because I found out I was quite good at maths at school, very good at maths, quite good at chemistry, and not very good at physics. And I had a friend from the town who I knew very well, who went to another school in Northampton, and he was doing the same subjects as me. So we got together and we said, well, what are we going to do? It looks like we can go to university, which not many went in those days. And he said, possibly engineering. He says, I've heard of something called chemical engineering. And I said, what is it? And he said, I don't know, but it sounds interesting. So that was my career's advice back in the 70s, why I chose chemical engineering. He ended up at Exeter University studying it, and I ended up at Nottingham. I had a great time at Nottingham, 4-year degree, did an internship as well at ExxonMobil, which I think we'll probably come on to a bit later. What were my career aspirations? Well, actually, I found it quite difficult to get a job. Took me about 9 months. And I suppose my first aspiration was get a job. And I thought I wanted to use my degree, at least initially. And so I applied to a number of companies. In the end, I got a graduate offer from Courtaulds in Coventry, which was a textile chemical company. It doesn't exist today. And in fact, it's quite interesting. As I talked to my students about that today, in those days, I had one interview with the head of department for about an hour. We liked each other and he offered me a job. Now, of course, I've got to go through hoops and circles and I don't know whatever else. But anyway, so my aspiration, I suppose, was really get a job, process engineering, chemical engineering, and see how it goes. And Courtaulds was the only company that offered me a job. And I went there, and I was based in Coventry. So it's funny how things happen. But anyways, it was the start of many other things in my life, as no doubt we'll get onto.
Indeed. So, having been sent to Coventry, you then managed to actually get a job with Procter and Gamble. A couple of years there, and then the start of really going for the big bang, 25 years in the oil and gas industry. But before I ask you about the oil and gas industry, I'm going to use this point to put in a little bit of a time reference. So each week, I normally pick a musical reference point that links to the guest's a key date. And we're going to use July 1981. And we find Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams. Well, it was a number one for 16 weeks, so it's probably most of that year. So I'm not sure if that helps people realise when July 1981 was, or if it just will annoy them all day when they keep thinking of Everything I Do It For You. So back to that time, 1981, the start of 25 years in the oil and gas industry. So how did it come about? Was that really your aspiration for oil and gas? You sort of touched on it earlier.
Yeah, so I spent about 4 years at Courtaulds. I had a great time, learnt a lot, got chartership, which 4 years was about the sort of average then from leaving university. And I probably would have stayed there longer, but what happened at that time was that the UK was suffering from cheap imports of textiles from the Far East. And Courtaulds ended up in having severe financial difficulties. And a number of people were sort of leaving at that time. And I thought, actually, I think I'd better go somewhere else. I love the company. I love the people I'm working with. An opportunity came up at Procter & Gamble in Newcastle. Great company. I was only there 2 years. And the reason for that was that although it was a great company, for me, it probably wasn't quite right at the time. I went from a highly technical job to probably a job that wasn't as technical. The most technical piece of equipment I worked on at Procter & Gamble was a washing machine. And I think I felt probably at the time, maybe I need to be doing something else. And as luck would have it, Exxon Chemical at that time, that was their name, came up with an opportunity that I saw advertised. And I was particularly interested in joining what is now ExxonMobil.
Okay.
Because I did a summer internship while I was at Nottingham at the ExxonMobil refinery at Fawley. And I was there for about 3 months. I had a great time. And I thought then that this is the industry I wanted to be in. Unfortunately, when I tried to get a graduate job with them straight from university, I didn't get an interview. However, 5-6 years later, a job does come up. And I think that's one of the learnings, is that nothing's ever lost, actually. And don't worry if you don't get something with someone, because it may turn up later anyway. And actually, as luck would have it, it was probably a more suitable role for me. So I joined Exxon in their chemical division based in Abingdon Research Centre. And I spent a number of years there, working, I guess, mainly as a research engineer, but increasingly I was a technical support to our sales team. And I got to see what the sales team were involved in and how I could support them. And I started to get a feeling that although I loved the technical sides of my job, Mark, I actually wanted to move more into commercial and eventually general management type roles. In other words, more people leadership rather than necessarily technical. So what happened next was I spent a few years in the technical center, and then an opportunity came up to work in the sales organization. And this came through someone who was to become my greatest mentor in the industry. And he eventually turned out to be a sponsor as well, as he rose up in the company. So he offered me this opportunity to work in sales, which I took. And initially I managed a very small sales team based in Europe, and eventually moved to the North Sea, Aberdeen, to manage a much larger sales operation with a manufacturing and technology group for about a couple of years. And that was really the start of my career taking off, mainly through opportunities that came up through taking that commercial role. My first opportunity to manage a P&L as well. And from that came a global marketing role, which was partly based in Houston. So I spent time in Houston for a period of time. And eventually I ended up managing Europe, Africa, Middle East, Russia, and the former Soviet Union, which was a big territory. But to get there, I had to work in a number of roles. As people will know, general management is managing literally all the functions. It's very much an executive role, managing all the functions. And to get there, I had to spend time in commercial, marketing, finance, analysis, technology, which I'd spent quite a bit of time in already, to understand what was happening with the supply chain, and of course, managing large teams. So that took a number of years to get there. And over that time period, Mark, a number of things happened to me and the organization, which will happen to everybody in their career. Exxon decided that our particular part of the business was probably not core. So they ended up joint venturing it with a competitor called Nalco, who were big in that industry. We became Nalco Exxon. Eventually, Exxon decided to pull out totally, and we became Nalco. Nalco survived a number of years before it actually was bought by Suez. And Suez kept us for about a couple of years until they decided we weren't core, and we became Nalco again. So over that time period, which takes us on, I'd say about another 20, 25 years, I actually went through several organizational changes, although a number of people remained the same in those years. But that's they talk a lot about what are the certainties of life: taxes, death, change, restructure. I've been through many restructures and changes, which I think will happen in everybody's careers. During that period, the 25 years, I have worked in 64 countries. Oil and gas, it was predominantly chemicals being used within oil and gas production and also in refineries and petrochemical plants. So I got to see many oil and gas production operations around the world, from the US to China. I was in China in the 1990s when very few Westerners ever ended up in China in those early days. And I can still remember, quite funny actually, passing through villages and the children coming up to you and touching you because they'd never seen Westerners before. So touching you, touching your hair. I can also remember I was in Yemen, which is probably a country you wouldn't want to go to now. It's quite dangerous. But at the time, there was a very high chance of getting kidnapped. So I can remember landing in the capital, Sana'a, and having about a 6-hour bus ride to the oil field and having to be protected by local tribesmen with Kalashnikov guns, because there was a very high chance of getting kidnapped. So again, we would stop off in little villages along the route to get to the oil field, and it was quite scary. I got used to it though, but the children would come out and greet you, and the boys would all have guns as well. Totally normal there, because you weren't a man or a boy unless you had a gun. So Yemen was an interesting experience, and I can think of a few. I could probably write a book on it, actually. I probably should have written a book. I wish I'd probably have written it earlier, but I probably need a ghostwriter to help me. But aside from spending time in the Middle East, I was in Kuwait with the burning oil fields. I visited most of the oil production facilities in the Middle East and refinery and petrochemical plants. And of course, they're being highlighted in the news now for unfortunate circumstances at the moment. I've been to oil fields in Russia and manufacturing plants. I had a team based in a place called Kazan in the Volga Urals in Russia, and I can remember visiting the plant then and having dinner with all the plant operators and singing karaoke songs in the evening, in mainly Beatles songs, which they all loved hearing. That was at minus 35. That's the coldest I've ever been in. The Kuwait experience was interesting. I was actually in the middle of the Kuwaiti desert at plus 55. That I can tell you, that is hot, particularly when you've got a sandstorm blowing and sand blasting your face. So I've been in the middle there. As I say, Russia, I've been both on the western side. I've been in the Sakhalin Islands, which is, again, takes you almost as long to get there as the time I think I spent there. Been to many parts of the other parts of Asia. So been to Malaysia, Indonesia operations. Been actually on Indonesia, a manufacturing plant, looking over the water and seeing Krakatoa in the distance. Fantastic experience. Obviously all around Europe, and I pretty well visited most of the oil fields in the US, apart from Alaska. So, and in Africa, North Africa, West Africa, both the British, what was used to be the British side, and the French West Africa, and also Southern Africa. So I've been very fortunate in my career. I've seen some wonderful sites. I've been to some terrific locations. I had a career that took me to the very top of the organization. I was managing about a third of the company's business, which is today is about $1 billion, several thousand people and over 50 countries. So I've got lots of great stories and things that I've done, mainly in leadership roles, of course. but also doing a lot of mentoring, which we'll come on to a little bit later. That's been my career, but I think you might be interested to know how it ended. And perhaps I can just briefly say,
Please,
when I reached this top position in the company, I was actually awarded the chairman's award for being the top executive in the company. And in fact, members of my team got awards. Now, this award was great, but obviously it was because of my team, and that was based on the performance of our team, the profitability we delivered, the increase in revenue, the sales, the safety performance, and a whole bunch of things. And as a result of that, Mark, I got a week in Puerto Rico, all expenses paid, with my wife, which was fantastic, of course. And I had to deliver a speech at the major dinner about the business and what we'd done to succeed and everything, a motivational speech. And I can remember, and yeah, I find this quite amusing now, although at the time it was quite interesting, a little bit different. I looked at the card, the menu card that we'd got, and on the back was a list of all the previous winners. And I went and I turned to my wife and I said, "Oh, Fiona, look at this. Left the company, fired, left." I turned around and I said, "You know what? I'm probably going to be out of the company in 2 years." And I was. Just shows you how you can never take anything for granted. And I think just to sort of close that, mentors and sponsors have been key in my career. And I've had two that I can particularly think of in my career that were absolutely vital. One in the early part of my career, who was my mentor and became my sponsor, and I sort of followed him up the executive route and eventually took his major role when he retired. The second sponsor I had, and he was from Exxon. The second sponsor I had was from Suez, and I developed a great relationship. He was the CFO of the company, and through him I got a great relationship with the president of the company. But what happened was, when Suez sold out, I lost my sponsor. And the sponsor and the headquarters went back to US management, and I hadn't cultivated those people as much. So I'm not saying that was the sole reason, but I think it's a lesson learned about, if you're going to get sponsors in the company, and they're very important, make sure you get a number of them, because you do not know what's going to happen to an individual in the organization, whether it's through leaving the company, whether it's through the company selling up, joint venture, or what have you. So that was a lesson learned, and I've certainly taken that with me in my current career.
Okay. Before talking about mentorship, which is one of the primary reasons for today's episode, you took a little diversion, because in 2007 you took a senior management role at Cheltenham Ladies College. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and if you can segue from there across to the start of your many coaching and mentorship roles, then that would be perfect. So tell us about Cheltenham's Ladies College, which isn't normally the continuation of a career in petrochem.
I left probably at the peak of my career, and I spent 9 months pondering what to do next, because I'd left that role in the industry at age 51, not an easy age to find another job. And I'm talking of 25 years ago now. This was early 2000s, 25 years ago. And I thought, you know what? I don't really need a big job anymore, managing multiple countries. I want to do something a little bit different. I actually initially went into the marine industry for a couple of years. And only stayed a short period. It probably wasn't quite right, but I managed to travel a little bit. Headquarters was in Monaco, so I got to see our headquarters in Monaco at the time. But actually, another job came up that I was far more interested in, which was to manage the professional guidance department in Cheltenham Ladies College. Now, I'd thought about taking a diversion in my career at the time, and I thought, yeah, actually, you know what, this might be an interesting thing to do. As I say, I didn't need the type of role I'd had before. I didn't need the salary. There was obviously going to be a massive salary drop, but it wasn't that wasn't a significant factor for me. It was the fact that I wanted to use my skills in doing something else. And I applied for a role there. I sort of knew the school a bit anyway, but I applied for a role and I was shortlisted. And I think I was fortunate in the sense that the head at the time had probably made a decision that she wanted somebody with a slightly different background than they would normally have. So actually, funnily enough, I was the only male shortlisted, and I was the only one from business. And we had to do a number of things during the shortlisting. One of them was to actually mentor some students over a period of time there. They sort of looked at how we did that, and the students had actually had a chance to say who they preferred and what have you. But I got the job, and I spent 4 years there, and that's some of the best years of my career, I can say. In fact, look, every year I've enjoyed, but it was so different, and literally every day was spent mentoring the students. So 8 to 10 students a day mentoring. I mean, it was fantastic. And some of these students, you can imagine, even at age 11, had the maturity of somebody 10 years older. So that was one thing I certainly brought. And I think the second thing I brought was a knowledge of industry that probably the people they'd had before had never had. So I was able to talk to the students about what it was like to have a career in business. And I was also able to bring them some thoughts about perhaps studying engineering, because a lot of the girls would probably go into more medical or dentist or vet related careers with a science and technology background. Not many would go into engineering, if at all. So I think I was able also to bring that to the students and to the school, and we had a lot more students going into engineering. So I did 4 years there. Amusing true story. I became the school's first male house mistress ever. So what happened was that I was doing my job, and they said, "Oh, could you also take on managing our sixth form day school house?" Now, obviously, I couldn't have managed a boarding house for obvious reasons, but the day school house was where the students would come in the morning and leave after school. So I took that role on. So in addition to my head of professional guidance, I was male house mistress for our sixth form day girls, and that was an interesting experience as well. And I did that for a couple of years. So after that, Mark, I decided I wanted to do something different again. And again, okay, I was well into my 50s by then, and I thought, why not? And I think, again, this is the thing, hopefully, that your viewers will get, is you're never too old to do new things. Just look for the opportunities, give them a go, and make sure you're well prepared for any interviews you might have. So actually, at that stage, I was aware of a boutique executive search company in London that I'd actually had some contact with before for a role. This was at the time when I was looking for a job after Exxon and Nalco. And I got in touch with the guy who ran the office, and I said, well, I've been thinking about maybe working in exec search. It's not an area I've worked in before. We had a chat before. I think we got on all right. What do you think? And I got the role. I got a role. So that wasn't advertised. That was purely through networking. Okay. And there's no doubt at all in my career, as you go through your career, networking becomes increasingly important. And in fact, in the end, you probably don't even need a CV. I haven't needed a CV for a long time, actually. So I decided to move to London Monday to Friday. My home is actually in Ludlow in Shropshire. And I worked in exec search for about full time for about 6 years. And it was a very interesting role. I really enjoyed it. And I particularly enjoyed meeting the people that we interviewed for roles, and also ended up mentoring many of them. And again, this was another thing that I found in the role, that I wasn't just somebody finding people for companies. I was actually mentoring the individuals that we were talking to. And at that stage also, I'd started doing a lot of voluntary work with business schools. I started mentoring MBA students through network contacts, and also started doing some voluntary stuff at my old university, Nottingham, in my old department, where they were quite keen to have somebody to come in from business, talk about employability. So increasingly, Mark, I had this full-time exec search role, but a lot of my holidays were being used up with all this voluntary stuff. And I thought, you know what? I'm getting to the stage now where I think I want to move to a portfolio career. And what happened next was that an opportunity came up, again through networking, for a part-time professor role at Nottingham to support the students to get jobs, internships, and industrial placements. And I'd started thinking about this portfolio career several years before I actually moved to it. And I'd said to myself, I wanted to build it around something, an anchor of some sort that I could look to as being a more sustainable, consistent role. And that was it. That was actually the thing that I could build it around. It was this 2-day-a-week professorship at Nottingham, which I could then combine with my work with MBA students and alumni at several business schools, where I mentor the students into the energy transition, and also combine that with getting some board roles, which I was beginning to find that I was becoming interested in board roles, and particularly related to the things that were important to me: the energy transition, education, which relates back to my family, which I guess we'll probably go on to talk a little bit about, and also mentoring and sponsorship and diversity and inclusion. So I would say the portfolio career, Mark, that I've had has been thought about at least 5 to 10 years before I actually went into it. And then I needed a number of circumstances to happen, of which the Nottingham role, which I was networking heavily for, and also the other roles with the business schools and the other mentoring and sponsoring, which began to sort of build up from that moment. And it all coincided as well with, I suppose, the stage of career I was at, Mark. So the fact that I was actually at so-called retirement age, and I certainly money was not a factor anymore.
So I came across you, I think, originally in a post within the Ingenuity 365 concept, where every week they named 7 people that were instrumental either in STEM or in supporting, or women in STEM or supporting women in STEM. And I think you're one of the names, and I clicked on LinkedIn and started sort of following some of the things you've done. And then I witnessed at the Ingenuity 365 live event, which brought probably 150 of those people together, that lots of women came up to you and sort of said hi and thanked you for the work you'd done, sort of mentoring them. So it wasn't just a LinkedIn post. I physically saw lots of people sort of come over and sort of thank you for your support and catch up with you. So can you tell us a little bit more about what really drove you to do so much for sort of encouraging diversity, inclusion, addressing that, but really sort of mentoring that industry, that side of the industry, in encouraging women into manufacturing and engineering?
It's become particularly clear that we have a not only a skill shortage, but we have a shortage of women and underrepresented groups in STEM careers. I've seen that in my career. In fact, quite interesting. If I go back many years, there was certainly bias and prejudice, and there were things said in interviews. I can still remember one, actually, Mark, where we we were interviewing for somebody in our team, and I was one of the managers involved in that. The best candidate was a woman, and I can still remember one or two managers reluctant to hire her because they thought she might go off and have a baby. It's incredible. You wouldn't get away with that. I mean, that is just absolutely appalling. I actually stood up for her and said I wanted her in my team. She was the best candidate, and I got her, and she was very good. But I'd noticed some things happening in those days, and it was pretty clear when I looked at some of the stats that we only had about 15-20% women in STEM careers. It's slightly higher in some areas like medicine and other areas like that, but it's pretty low in tech, construction, energy, etc. Probably no more about 20%. It was very clear in my own mind that we needed to do something, and I thought, what is the best way I can use my career that I've had to actually make a change, make a difference? And I still hark back to my mother, who I wrote a post about, who always told me that everyone was special and unique. And that's the way I've always tried to treat people in both the way I lead. I believe very strongly in servant leadership, where it's others that count, not me. And it's very much the way I wanted to work to try and improve the situation. And although I'd never had any formal qualifications in mentoring, I did a short course for a couple of weeks. I felt I actually had a lot to give. I'd got a 40 to 50 year career to very senior levels, and I believed that I could support people in that way. So more and more, what happened was I got more and more involved with organizations that were looking to effect a change. Powerful women, which is women in energy, women in tech, women in construction, women in engineering. I got on the board of the Women Engineering Society, and more what was happening is I was both reaching out to individuals that had talked about needing a mentor, but more and more actually they were coming to me. And whether through LinkedIn or whether through these organizations, I mean, I'd go to conferences, be talking to people, and it became clear in the conversation they were looking for a mentor. Yeah. And I suppose being the nature of the person I am, I would take them on. And it built up to the point where I think today, I haven't counted, it's probably a couple of thousand. But interestingly, out of that couple of thousand, about half of them are men. A lot of people think I just mentor women. I don't actually. But the women are a significant part of it for obvious reasons, because 50% people I mentor are women. And we're talking 15 to 20% in the industry. So proportionally, it's more. The other thing I was very keen on was the other underrepresented groups, Black, minority, ethnic. And I support and mentor those. But for me, Mark, it's not just about mentoring, because I learned very early in my career, and I mentioned it earlier, about sponsors. Yes. Sponsorship accelerates careers. Mentoring is great for providing guidance on your career, training, where you want to go, etc. Maybe trying to map out how you might do that and understanding the culture of the company. But it's sponsorship that accelerates careers. So I made a decision that I would mentor and sponsor, and I would do that in a number of ways. I would do that through supporting them in their companies. If I had contacts in the companies, I would support them there. And the other way I would support them would be through social media, and particularly LinkedIn. So you will see a lot of posts from me mentoring, sponsoring. In fact, I don't even mention the words. I just highlight these people, and they're mostly women, because a lot of generalizing, I found some of the women that I work with were perhaps a little bit reluctant to showcase what they had. Yeah. And I said, well, there's no, you shouldn't feel ashamed about it. So let's do it. And that's what I would do. And so I will highlight and sponsor and mentor those women and underrepresented groups and the men that I support. And in the belief that they will develop their careers to the maximum. And I'm very fortunate because I work with so many of them now, and I learned something new from them. The other thing I would say about mentoring, it's not about me what I can give them. It's about what I get back. So they reverse mentor me. A lot of people say to me, "Who's your mentor, Vince?" And I say, "Well, you know what? I'm very lucky. I got 2,000 of them." And that's it. And actually, over the next couple of weeks, Mark, I'm going to be at the IET. I've got a conference next week where I'm going to be sitting down with one of my mentees, and we're actually going to show the audience how it's worked, the two-way relationship. And in about another 2 weeks at the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, they've got a conference in Warwick, and I'm going to do the same with another mentee. We're going to actually have a what you might call a fireside chat to show how a mentoring relationship works. But for me, the magic in the relationship is it's two-way, and I believe very strongly in that. And I think I guess we'll probably get into how can that relate to the SMEs and how they work. But I believe very, very strongly that mentoring is key. Whether it's formal or not is another issue. It certainly was not formal when I worked in industry, and nor was sponsoring. We never ever said, "Please, will you be my mentor? Please, will you be my sponsor?" It evolved. It evolved in a natural way.
So you've read my mind. The obvious question, as this audience is really directed towards SMEs and manufacturing, is can you offer advice and your thoughts on mentoring within SMEs?
Yeah. So a lot depends on the size of the SME. Obviously, I worked in corporates for a substantial part of my career. At the time that I worked in them, there was no formal process, but I have worked with a lot of organizations since then that have formal mentorship processes. So I would say to the SMEs online, you need to have, I believe, a mentoring process in your organizations. It could be formal, it could be informal, but I think people need to feel that they have a mentor within the company. Very often it's the line manager, but not always. But it's got to be somebody that you can talk to on some sort of regular basis. I think the second thing that I would suggest the SMEs have, not just a mentoring relationship, but what I would call a reverse mentoring relationship. Very often people join companies, and I think particularly women and underrepresented groups have often found it difficult. In fact, we have a huge retention problem in the industry, whether it's SME or corporate. And I think what we need to have happen is the senior leadership in companies need to pick the ball up on this. And one of the ways they can pick the ball up is to actually have a junior employee mentor them. And the mentoring is going to be very different to what a senior would do with a junior. The mentoring from the junior is, well, are you aware that these are sorts of issues we might have here? These are some of the solutions I might suggest you might want to look at. And I think obviously the senior leader needs to be open to having that sort of relationship. But I think a reverse mentoring would perhaps work very well in the organization. I think the next thing that I would say within the SME is it's moving on to the sponsorship. Doesn't have to be formal at all, but I think the senior leaders need to be looking out for people who could well progress into more senior roles and look to sponsor them. Traditionally, companies have looked at certain factors. I mean, I remember in the companies I've worked in, we looked at not just your existing performance, but we looked at what your potential might be, and also whether that was something that you particularly wanted to do. Because a lot of people had the capability to move into senior roles, but didn't want it. So I think they need to be looking at their staff and talking to their people and using their line managers to do that if they're up to it, and find out the ones who actually have the potential but have not been putting themselves forward. And let me give you an example. I was talking to a woman in a small engineering company, and she'd been given the impression by her line manager that the only way she was going to develop in the company was to do a good job in what she was doing. Work hard and do a good job and you'll be recognized. So we had a conversation about that, and she said, "You know what, I believe I'm doing a great job. My line manager says I'm doing a great job." I'm putting everything into it, and I'm hoping opportunities will come up. So I go to him and I say, well, I'm looking for the next opportunity. What do you think there might be on the horizon? And he said this to me for the last year or two: be patient. There will be opportunities that will come up. And you know what? I'm patient, but I see men in the organization getting those opportunities. And I'm fairly certain they're not working as hard as me. And I said, well, you know what's happening. What's happening is that those men that are getting those opportunities and maybe are doing a 90% job. And you know what? A 90% job is enough. But the other 10% is going on networking. You're not networking enough with senior leaders in the company or managers who can offer you those opportunities. And in fact, I sort of blame your line manager for not actually, if I was your line manager, I'd be opening the door for you to those other managers and the opportunities would come. But for some reason, he's not doing that. So I think it's incumbent on him. So my feeling is the SMEs that hopefully people are listening in need to think about mentoring. They need to think about reverse mentoring, but they also need to think about sponsoring, particularly those people, maybe the quieter, more introvert, maybe the neurodiverse, the ones that wouldn't be obvious when you were looking at coming up with your list of people to move up in the company, because actually they may actually be far better in those roles, but you're not giving them the opportunity. So that's what I would say to the SMEs. But look out for the people who wouldn't be obvious to look out for, and through mentoring, reverse mentoring, and sponsorship, you may well find future leaders in your organizations who maybe wouldn't have been obvious to start with.
Okay. Sounds like some good advice for people to take away. I don't know if this is going to lead to advice or just as a total diversion, but looking back at your LinkedIn profile and something you've mentioned to me as well, is you're particularly fond of fitness, and your LinkedIn profile, the title sort of banner across the top is nothing to do with petrochem, nothing to do with university, nothing to do with mentorship. It's just a set of weights. So I'm assuming fitness is pretty important to you. So tell us a little bit about that journey, how long you've been a fitness fanatic, what it's given to you, and what you'd like to share.
When I was young, I played sport at school. So it was a rugby playing school initially, became football playing and cricket. So I'd play those. When I moved, when I was at university, I played football for the university. And when I moved to Coventry, I played amateur football for a local team in the north of Coventry. So I was always playing sport then. But then as my career took off and I started doing all this traveling, it became more and more difficult. So what I would try and do is have some sort of fitness regime. If I could book myself into a hotel, there was with a little fitness room. And in those days, of course, it was just a bicycle and a rowing machine. That's all it was, no weights or anything. And then if I could do a bit of running as well. So I tried to maintain that, because actually I'm a strong believer that if you want to have a career, particularly one where you're going to travel a lot, and bear in mind, it's a true story, Mark. I've been married for 40 years, 30 years we've been apart, because I've been traveling on business. So I've traveled 75% of my married career, if you like. I've been on the road, been traveling a lot. And I think you need to be pretty fit to travel, particularly being up early morning, traveling all over the world, time zones, and you name it. So I've tried to maintain that. But actually, what's happened in the last few years is I've had a couple of things happen to me. One was I had a disc come out of my back and sciatica, which if ever you've had that, is extremely painful. And I had to have an exercise coach and an osteopath for that. And then about 3 years ago, I had prostate cancer surgery, which took me several months to recover from that. But over that time period, and certainly in the last two to 3 years, I've decided to ramp up my fitness. There's no doubt at all, as you get older, you need to probably do more fitness stuff. And moving more to weights and things. And actually, I actually find that deadlifting in the gym and using weights is a huge part of not only who I am, but it's been a huge part of developing me as a person for the mentoring and sponsoring I do. Because if you look at things like gym work, it is often about continuous improvement. Well, I try to strive to be better every day, at least 1% better every day that I can be. I learn something new every day from the people I talk to. I learn something new in the gym every day about myself. I find also the discipline very important. I can be quite a disciplined individual, and I think the discipline that I need in the gym is very helpful for me in the work that I do now. I still travel a lot, but it's mainly around the UK. I don't travel globally like I used to. So again, a lot of travel. Need to keep fit for that. So I think both the mental and physical things that I get from the gym definitely help me in the work that I do today. I suppose I'm only sad that I didn't start a lot earlier, but it's important to start at some stage. And I'm a great believer as well that the other thing I post a lot about is my disdain of ageism. Companies have a tendency to write you off above a certain age. I see so many PowerPoint slides showing, we've got a real problem now because we've got 50% of our workforce who's going to be over the age of 50 in the next 5 years. And I'm thinking, all you can talk about is the age. What you need to realize is how much somebody can bring with their level of experience. And in fact, a lot of people in their latter careers where companies may write them off, actually, they shouldn't be writing them off. They should be using them as mentors in the company. Who better to mentor younger people in companies than people who've been there much longer and have got those years experience? And that's the way I look at things. It's the fitness part is a very important part of my life and helps me in my career. And also, I think age becomes irrelevant, and if I can get that message over, I will. I mean, I think I'm doing a lot of my peers maybe retired some years ago. I don't believe in retirement. I'm just going to keep using all the skills and abilities I've got, and at some stage, Mark, they will have to carry me out.
It sounds like you're a long way away from retirement, but probably through sheer bloody mindedness, shall we say, or keeping busy, keeping involved. A traditional question, and it seems particularly apt to ask it to yourself, is, we're recording this over a computer, but what do you talk to people about when you're actually out at the weekend, maybe when you're traveling in the week? So when you're not sat in front of a computer and talking work, what do you like talking to people about, whether that's in a kitchen, at a party, at the pub? What are your other interests?
That's a good question. I guess a number of things. Depends who I'm talking to, of course. So I like to talk about sport, of course, whether it's rugby, football, cricket, or whatever. So sport plays a key part. The second thing I like to talk about with people is I've got an interest in ancient history, which is probably not a huge surprise, particularly Roman, and not so huge surprise considering my parents were Italian. So I have a very strong link to both Italy, because I got all my relatives there, and Greece, because I actually found out when I had a DNA test done not that long ago that I was more Greek than Italian. So it has to be ancient Greece as well as ancient Rome. And as I read quite a bit about the Roman Empire, I'm very interested in it, and also about the time when the Greeks were leading things in our part of the world. So I like to talk about ancient history. I also like to talk about, and again, it depends on who I'm talking to, about the work I do. Because I think a lot of people, when I mention about, they have to ask me, what do you do? I'm a mentor and sponsor, etc., etc. They say, oh, what does that mean? So often I get into discussions about the work that I do, and particularly around areas around diversity and inclusion. And obviously diversity and inclusion has got some mixed reporting depending where you are in the world. So I do like to put my views forward that it's not about square pegs in round holes or vice versa. It is about leveling the playing field for people who actually have the skills, the transferable skills to be considered for roles, but have never thought about it. And they never thought about it because they don't see people like them in the organizations, or they've been excluded, or they've not been encouraged. My job is to encourage those people to see that there are opportunities there and for them to apply. And I'm particularly interested, the energy transition. If I look back at my career, to get into oil and gas, you'd have probably needed to be an engineer to get anywhere, petroleum engineer, chemical engineer like me. The energy transition, it's interesting, has opened the door to people from different backgrounds. So I'd say 50% of the people that I put into energy transition roles do not have an engineering background, which is quite interesting. So that maybe suggests the sort of type of people that they're looking for as well, not just engineers, but other backgrounds. So I think there's lots of things I could talk about. Obviously, I like some forms of music. So Phil Collins, still my favorite, and Coldplay. So I like to talk about some aspects of music. And of course, I still remember the Beatles because I grew up with the Beatles. So music's there. Might be the latest films. I do go to the cinema, occasionally to the theatre. And also, we'll talk a lot about travel. I've travelled pretty well all over the world, with the exception of South America. I've always got a story from somewhere that I can talk about. And people are always interested to talk about their experiences. So we often share experiences of travelling in certain countries. So lots of things that usually can talk about.
Okay, so perhaps South America might be the answer to the final question, which is tradition to ask the guests, what do you have planned, or what do you hope to achieve in the next 12 months? So what's the next 12 months look like for you?
Well, I've actually just written a post about a number of events I've attended for International Women's Day, and I put a statement in there which I will stick to, which is I'm going to step up the pace of my mentoring and sponsoring. What's become clear to me is we need to do more. We talk a lot about allies, of course. I'm on a board of an organisation called Male Allies UK. What's interesting, I need to obviously do more in that area, because what's interesting in a lot of these events that we go to, the number of men there is very, very low. So I need to sort of work hard, not just mentoring and sponsoring, but to actually talk to more men about why it's important for them to be involved in these discussions. Because the reality is we're not going to get anywhere near getting more women and underrepresented groups in unless we get more men involved who generally hold more of the senior levels to actually sponsor them, to bring them in, to actually be involved in these employee resource groups that they might have in the organizations. And I think not enough of them are. So that's what I will be doing, actually. I will be working hard to increase the number of people I mentor and sponsor. And also I will be doing more to get more men into these conferences and events, because I think we need to increase. We need to get people in there who normally we're preaching to the converted. So we need to get more men in there who perhaps have thought about it, were reluctant for various reasons, but I think we can show them that you need to be there, and actually it's a win-win for everyone. It's not women win, you lose. The reality is we all win.
Yeah, sounds good. For a wrap up, can I ask, how do people find out more about you, and in particular, how would they follow you and contact you? I'm assuming you're going to say LinkedIn, as that was the route for how I discovered you. So
there's
what are
two
your
ways.
Contact details?
Yeah, there's two ways they can get me, Mark. One is LinkedIn. And I probably post 2 or 3 times a week on LinkedIn. The other way you can get me is Instagram. And it's interesting because up until about a year ago, I never used Instagram. What I've discovered is it opens the door to some people who perhaps don't use LinkedIn as much. So maybe it's brought me a slightly different audience. But I'm very happy for people to reach, if they would like to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Vince Pizzoni, you'll find me very easily. There aren't many Pizzonis on LinkedIn, so hopefully they'll find me very easily. And I'm Vince Pizzoni, at Vince Pizzoni on Instagram as well.
Okay, cool. So before I sign off and say the usual sort of things, can I ask, do you have a final sentence, question, observation, or a thought that you'd like to sign off the episode with?
I'll say a couple of things, actually, if that's all right. One is my greatest mentor. What did I learn from my greatest mentor? He told me very early in my career, and I've tried to stick by this in all my career. He said, Vince, there are 2 types of people in this world. There are those who see a problem to every solution and those who see a solution to every problem. Make sure you're the second. And I've tried to live by that. So I don't see problems. I just see solutions. I'm a positive, optimistic person. No moaning from me. It's all about, we have an issue, we can solve it. Let's do it. The second thing I would bring, which won't be a surprise, which I talk a lot to my students about, but really everyone I mentor, and that is the most important thing that you can do in your career is network. Because through networking, you will develop the relationships which will sustain you through your career and will actually bring you opportunities that you would never have thought about, which have brought me over my career. So people often say, what's your one word? And my one word is actually one word 3 times: network, network, network.
Okay, that seems a particularly good point to sign off on. So thank you for that, Vince. Thanks very much for being a guest for this episode. I'm sure we could have talked an awful lot more about a lot of other things, but hopefully it's given a taste for you and some of the things you're about. So brilliant. Thank you for being a guest. I'm going to wrap up with the usual words to say, if anyone would like to send in a comment, a suggestion, or in particular, if you'd like to volunteer to be a guest on a future episode, please email us at inquiries@mtdcnc.com or contact myself, Stuart Whitehead, or Joe Reynolds. For me, Mark Weymouth at the Sensor Specialist Plus Automation. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Cheers.